Ladies and gentlemen, friends, neighbors, and guests, welcome to this very, very special event of the Gaithersburg Book Festival, an evening with the great Billy Collins. As you know, tickets for this event became available at 10 a.m. this morning, but what you may not know is that by 10:03, they were all gone. And I should note that this prompted one of our city staffers to exclaim that Billy Collins must indeed be the Taylor Swift of poetry. It's Super Bowl weekend. We got Taylor Swift on the mind. Friends, my name is Judd Ashman, and I have the honor to serve you not only as the founder and chair of the Gaithersburg Book Festival, but as the mayor of the greatest city in the world, Gaithersburg, Maryland. I want to recognize a few people who are here in the audience with us tonight, and I want to start with Montgomery County Council member and former mayor Sidney A. Katz. The mayor of Glen Echo has joined us, Dia Costello. Former Gaithersburg City Council member Mike Sesma. We have our Deputy City Manager, Dennis Enslinger. And we are expecting a few other elected officials and city staff, but I haven't seen them, so they're not getting announced. This is a special night, not only because we get the honor of spending some time with Billy Collins, but it is also the kickoff of the 15th year of the Gaithersburg Book Festival. GBF is officially a program of the city of Gaithersburg, and it has grown into one of the largest, and I like to think one of the best book and author events in America. Much of that success is due to our wonderful city staff, led by our events team in our Department of Parks, Recreation, and Culture. And much success is also due to the tireless year-round work of our volunteer planning committee, who every year put together almost all of the programming that you see at our festival. So I'd like anybody who's on our committee, who's part of city staff, please raise your hands and be recognized. Our festival has a wonderful list of sponsors and partners, and I invite you to visit our site at gaithersburgbookfestival.org to see all of them, but we're limited on time here, so I'm only going to shout out 3 of them right now. First is Asbury Methodist Village, who let us use this beautiful space tonight and have supported our festival in so many great ways over the years. I want to thank our title sponsor, the Carnegie at Washingtonian, a new community that's set to open later this year. And I want to thank our bookseller, Politics and Prose, and I'm going to make a little pitch for them in a minute. But in the meantime, can we give all of our sponsors and partners a great round of applause? Now for the 2 most important things I'm going to say to you tonight. Number 1, please take out your phone right now and put it on silent mode. That's the most important thing I'm saying to you tonight. Second is, while you have your phone out, open the calendar app and save the date for the Gaithersburg Book Festival on May 18th, Saturday, May 18th. And I will note for fans of poetry here tonight, among the 130 plus authors who will be appearing at our festival on May 18th, there are a couple of outstanding poet authors. Richard Blanco, who many remember as the inaugural poet for President Barack Obama, who was awarded the National Humanities Medal by President Biden, among many awards over the years, and Clint Smith, whose book, How the World Is Past, won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Nonfiction, the Hillman Prize for Book Journalism, the Dayton Literary Peace Prize, and was selected by the New York Times as one of the top 10 books of 2021. Those are just two of the many, many, many amazing headliner authors you're going to get to meet on May 18th, so save that date. But getting back to tonight, after this program, we're inviting everyone to join us down the hall, to sort of around the corner down the hall, in the community room, where Billy Collins will be signing books. Books are available for sale here. You saw them on the way in, thanks to our partners at Politics and Prose, one of America's finest independent bookstores. Buying a book is helpful to our festival, not because we see any money from it directly, but because the more books that we sell at our events, the more great authors and poets will keep wanting to come visit us. So, and plus, it all helps support local jobs and the local economy. So if you're in a position to buy a book tonight, or several because they make great gifts, please do. To introduce Billy Collins, I'm going to bring up Serena Augusto Cox. Serena, well, we're going to get to that in a second. Serena is a talented poet herself, as well as the poetry editor of the Mid-Atlantic Review and a full-time editor by day for numerous trade associations. Serena is in charge of all of the poetry programming at the Gaithersburg Book Festival, including this program tonight, and what a spectacular job she's been doing for all of us in this community. So please give an extra big welcome to my friend and colleague, Serena Augusto Cox.
Wow, look at all those people out here to see Billy Collins. Welcome. I wanted to just put out that I've met Billy Collins in 2014, and it was one of the most awe-inspiring events of my life. I was just out of college about 5 years, and the only word I could eke out was hi. He graciously signed my books, and ever since then, I've read all of them. It is an honor for me to introduce him tonight. Billy Collins is a former Poet Laureate of the United States. He's the author of 12 collections of poetry, including the bestsellers Aimless Love, The Trouble with Poetry, Sailing Alone Around the Room. He is also the editor of Poetry 180, 180 More, and Bright Wings. A former distinguished professor at Lehman College of the University of New York, Collins served as the New York State Poet from 2004 to 2006. In 2016, he was inducted into the American Academy of Arts and Letters. He lives in Florida with his wife, Susanna. Please welcome Billy Collins.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Thank you very much. And it's thank our great mayor, Judd Ashman, for inviting me as a kind of adjunct to the Gaithersburg Poetry Festival. And it's great to be here. I did want to assure you that I am not the Taylor Swift of poetry. I am the Billy Collins of poetry. And that should suffice. What's all the fuss about her? I don't know. Anyway, so I'm going to read some poems, and I've got about 2 days worth of poems here, and but I came across something I wanted to just put out there. It was a quote from that stopped me in my tracks by Terry Eagleton, who's a very smart, sarcastic and bright critic, and he gave a definition of writing. Now, if you thought about that, if that was an assignment, that'd be really hard to define, writing. It's such a big thing. But he seemed to have nailed it better than Merriam or Webster. And he said, writing is language which can function perfectly well in the physical absence of its author. And I thought, well, what am I doing here? Why am I running around the country? I'm going to start with a poem that has an epigraph to it, and it's a quote from Yeats, and it's in a prose essay. And Yeats said, Yeats was one of the great, really started modern poetry, an amazing craftsman, and intertwined with the history of modern Ireland and prehistoric Ireland as well. At the same time, he was not a fun person. Always wore black, never went into a pub. Someone described him as the equestrian Yeats, so he's up there on the horsey. And from that height, he said, a poet never speaks directly as to someone at the breakfast table. So he had an elevated sense of poetry and its audience. And later, I came across another quote. You can see I read him carefully, even though I sound like I'm being critical of him. He said, "The poet is never that bundle of accident and incoherence that sits down to breakfast." So there's something embarrassing about breakfast, apparently. It's just, then one more, watching Downton Abbey, at one point, Lord Grantham says, "There's something foreign about high spirits at breakfast." So anyway, I'm going to read a poem, and I'm just going to stop. Could you not videotape? I appreciate it. Thank you. I figure, I don't mind pictures, but we got together here, and you got the 3-minute window to get tickets, and you parked and all that. So let's make this our experience, and rather not videotape it, okay? Thanks. The poem is called "A Portrait of the Reader with a Bowl of Cereal." Every morning I sit across from you at the same small table, sun all over the breakfast things, curve of a blue and white pitcher, a dish of berries, me in a sweatshirt or robe, you invisible. Most days we are suspended over a deep pool of silence. I stare straight through you to look out the window at the garden, the powerful sky, a cloud passing behind a tree. There is no need to pass the toast, the pot of jam, or pour you a cup of tea, and I can hide behind the paper, rotate in its drum of calamitous news. But some days I may notice a little door swinging open in the morning air, and maybe the tea leaves of some dream will be stuck to the china slope of the hour. Then I will lean forward, elbows on the table, with something to tell you, and you will look up, as always, your spoon dripping milk, ready to listen. So I think it's fine to have breakfast. Enjoy having breakfast with the reader. Galway Cannell is a wonderful poem about having breakfast with John Keats. The poem is called Oatmeal, or porridge, as Keats would say. And so here's some poems from a book called Whale Day that was just out 2 books ago, I guess. Excuse me. And the first poem I'm going to read is Walking My 75-year-old Dog. She's painfully slow, so I often have to stop and wait while she examines some roadside weeds as if she were reading the biography of a famous dog. And she's not a pretty sight anymore, dragging one of her hind legs, her coat too matted to brush or comb, and a snout white as a marshmallow. We usually walk down a disused road that runs along the edge of a lake whose surface trembles in a high wind and is slow to ice over as the months grow cold. We don't walk very far before she sits down on her worn haunches and looks up at me with her rheumy eyes. Then it's time to carry her back to the car. Just thinking about the honesty in her eyes, I realize I should tell you she's not really 75. She's 14. I guess I was trying to appeal to your sense of the bizarre, the curiosities of the sideshow. I mean, who really cares about another person's dog? Everything else I've said is true, except the part about her being 14. I mean, she's old, but not that old, and it's not polite to divulge the true age of a lady. Thank you. Thank you. I came across a lot of these poems come out of reading other poems, and in this case, I was reading through Elizabeth Bishop's collected poems, and I came across 2 facing pages with both poems about sleeping. And on one page, the poem was called Sleeping on the Ceiling. Okay, it's poetry, fair enough. Sleep anywhere you want. And the other one was sleeping standing up. And I thought, well, how can I get in this myself? And so I thought I could. The only way to go was conservative. So my poem is called "Sleeping on My Side." Every night, no matter where I am, when I lie down, I turn my back on half the world. At home, it's the East I ignore, with its theaters and silverware, as I face the adventurous West. But when I'm out on the road in some hotel's room, 213 or 402, I could be pointed anywhere. Yet I hardly care, as long as you are there, facing the other way. So we are defended in all degrees, and my left ear is pressing down, as if listening for hoofbeats in the ground. Thank you. I write quite a lot of poems in hotels. There's not much to do. I have no standards for watching television. I mean, at home, I just watch some sports and the news, and that's almost a bit. But I watch such trash on television if in a hotel room. I can't even tell you. But anyway, so today I wrote this little poem here. It's 8 lines long, and inspired by something in the bathroom of this hotel, and it's called Crabtree and Evelyn. James Tate said, "Poetry is everywhere, it just needs editing." Crabtree and Evelyn. Crabtree and Evelyn could be 2 characters in a Dickens novel. Mr. Crabtree, an old miser who rules the boarding house, from which Evelyn, a sweet young knave from the country, is thrown onto the roadway one cold, harsh, snowy night. Anybody ever hear of the phenomenon of Tennessee fainting goats? More than I thought. Well, if you've never heard about them and you doubt what I'm saying, you can go on the YouTube and you'll see they'll perform for you. They'll do their thing. But I couldn't help the opportunity to write something, and it's called Down on the Farm. Whenever the conversation turns to the subject of Tennessee fainting goats, the question that always comes up is why? Are they so squeamish that they faint like Victorian ladies whenever the farmer uses language on becoming a gentleman? Or is it catching one goat fainting because he sees another one fainting? But that still leaves open the question of what makes the first goat faint. Does the memory of having keeled over one morning make one keel over again? Are they in love? Or is it all just too much? No one seems to know for sure, but it's something to think about when I'm trying to get to sleep at night, or when I'm looking out a window at the barn and the fenced-in pastures beyond. To see a goat stiffen before pitching over on its side with a thump is truly unnerving. But when he rises in a minute or two, as if from the dead, and goes back to munching with his head down in the sweet grass on these hillsides, then everything seems okay again, just like before. Thank you. Do you know what a snood is? It's an odd, you're really hip, you know about Tennessee fainting goats, snoods, and what do I have to tell you? Yeah, sort of a lady's hairnet, not used very often today, except by guys, long-haired guys, think they're pretty hip. And I think if they knew it was called a snood, they might not wear them so readily. But that's the only odd word in here. And the poem's called Safe Travels. Every time Gulliver travels into another chapter of Gulliver's Travels, I marvel at how well-traveled he is, despite his incurable gullibility. I don't enjoy traveling anymore because, for instance, I still don't know the difference between a bloke and a chap. And I'm embarrassed whenever I have to hold out a palm of loose coins to a cashier as if I were feeding a pigeon in the park. Like Proust, I see only trouble in store if I leave my room, which is not lined with cork, only sheets of wallpaper featuring orange flowers and little green vines. Of course, anytime I want, I can travel in my imagination, but only as far as Toronto, where some graduate students with goatees and snoods are translating my poems into Canadian. My mother is from Ontario, so I'm half Canadian, so I can probably point at the Canadians. This poem is about, it's about a thought that comes into your head, and you're not very happy to have it there, and you're wondering, what perverse part of me ever summoned that up? And and you banish it as quickly as possible. And the question is, who goes first? You know, who goes first? And a friend of mine said, this is a while ago, he said he was kept awake at night wondering which Everly brother would go first. Anyway, this is called Me First. I'm not crazy, this happens. There's a expression in Arabic, and I'm not even going to try, I'm not going to try, but it means, you stay here, I go first. It's a mother to a daughter, usually. Me first. We often fly in the sky together, and we're always okay. Here's our luggage now waiting for us on the carousel, and we drive lots of places in all manner of hectic traffic, yet here we are, pulling in the driveway again. So many opportunities to die together, but no meteor has hit our house, no tornado has lifted us into its funnel. The odds say then that one of us will go before the other, like heading off into a heavy snowstorm, leaving the other one behind to stand in the kitchen or lie on the bed under the fan. So why not let me, the older one, go first? I don't want to see you everywhere as I wait for the snow to stop before setting out with a crooked stick calling your name. Here's a short poem which, let's see, is sort of a solution to the problem, the nagging problem of mortality. And it's called The Garland. The Garland. I would like to be laid to rest in a big tomb topped by the figure of a stone angel who appears to have landed there in order to sob forevermore, her face buried in her bent arm, one folded wing hanging by her side. Then, whenever I found the time to visit my own grave, after approaching with slow, respectful steps, I would place around her rough neck the garland of wildflowers that I knitted, then run back to the car, laughing and immortal. So, yeah, lots of things you can do besides sleeping on the ceiling. A lot of these poems I've noticed this before, but there are very few people in them. I mean, I had parents that I'll confess, and if it's a love poem, there's an implied or even invisible beloved, but I don't have, uncles and brothers and stuff. I don't have any brothers anyway, but And if my students have lots of people in their poems, I tell them, I'm pretty harsh when I'm in poetry workshops, because I say that, in the real world, people would stop reading your poem right here and turn the page. And I say, I'm getting paid to do this, so I finished your poem and I read and I felt a little ka-ching. And I read it twice. I made marks on it, and I'll talk about it with you. But first of all, I'm going to tell you why I stopped reading. But I generally have some deal makers that apply universally, like names of Greek and Roman gods and goddesses. I'm out. Or relatives, like Dad. Goodbye. And grandmother, Granny. Whew, I'm totally out. And I just say, if you want to write about other people, go down the hall, take a class in fiction or playwriting. Poetry is mostly about the poet, and being an only child is excellent preparation for this, by the way. And so here's a poem called Only Child. I can't see you well enough to detect the only childs out there. I think the plural should be childs. There's one, okay. But if there is a signing line, there'll be a special little line for you on the side there. 'Cause you deserve it, So here we are, only child. I never wished for a sibling, boy or girl. Center of the universe, I had the back of my parents' car all to myself. I could look out one window, then slide over to the other window without any quibbling over territorial rights. And whenever I played a game on the floor of my bedroom, it was always my turn. Not until my parents entered their 90s did I long for a sister, a nurse I named Mary, who worked in a hospital 5 minutes away from their house, and who would drop everything, even a thermometer, whenever I called. Be there in a jiff and on my way were two of her favorite expressions. And now that the parents are dead, I wish I could meet Mary for coffee every now and then at that Italian place with the blue awning, where we would sit and reminisce even on rainy days. I would gaze into her green eyes and see my parents, my mother looking out of Mary's right eye, and my father staring out of her left, which would remind me of what an odd duck I was as a child, a little prince and a loner who would break off from his gang of friends on a Saturday and find a hedge to hide behind. And I would tell Mary all about that too, and never embarrass her by asking about her non-existence. And maybe we would have another espresso and a pastry, and I would always pay the bill and walk her home. See, I can include other people, but only ones that I've made up. But that's what novelists do too, right? Here's a poem called 1960. In the old joke, the marriage counselor tells the couple who never talks anymore to go to a jazz club, because at a jazz club, everybody talks during the bass solo. But of course, no one starts talking just because of a bass solo, or any other solo for that matter. The quieter bass solo just reveals the people in the club who have been talking all along. The same ones you can hear on some well-known recordings. Bill Evans, for example, who is opening a new door into the piano while some guy chats up his date at one of the little tables in the back. I have listened to that album so many times, I can anticipate the moment of his drunken laugh as if it were a strange note in the tune. And so, anonymous man, you have become part of my listening. Your romance, a romance lost in the past, and a reminder somehow that each member of that trio has died since then, and maybe so have you, and sadly, maybe she. Thank you. And here's a poem okay, I don't have a watch now, so that's how poor I am. And, but I'm using my iPhone for that. Okay. This is a poem called Joy. It's not often that I see the sun rise and set on the same day as I did the other day. It's easy to tell which is which, even if you just emerge from a coma. The rising is a theater of silvery light, and the setting done and imbued by gold. On the morning I'm thinking about, it rose over a low cluster of clouds, then burst forth and lit up the sunny side of everything. And when it went down in a cauldron of molten metal and seemed to shudder in a foundry of its own making. When I lay in the dark that night, I imagined the sun shining down on Asia, always rising and setting somewhere, waking some people, sending some others to bed, as it does in that love poem by John Donne. And I thought of the sun advancing in its own grander orbit, a father taking the family of planets for a ride through the Milky Way. What a brazen wonder to be alive on Earth amid the clockwork of all this motion. This was in Key West. It was January, when the early morning hours can be chilly. I remember putting on a sweater, then stepping out onto the deck with the newspaper under my arm and checking out the water and the sky before lighting up a big El Stinko cigar. Now, any poet with half a brain would have ended that with that beautiful line, what a brazen wonder it is to be alive in the clockwork of all this motion. And I just had to go and spoil the whole thing. It was too sweet, you know, and I don't smoke anything, especially particularly cigars, but if I did, I'd probably smoke an El Stinko. So let me move to another book here. And here's a poem called Cheerios, speaking of more breakfast cereal. Cheerios. One bright morning in a restaurant in Chicago, as I waited for my eggs and toast, I opened the Tribune only to discover that I was the same age as Cheerios. Indeed, I was a few months older than Cheerios. For today, the newspaper announced was the 70th birthday of Cheerios, whereas mine had occurred earlier in the year. Already I could hear them whispering behind my stooped and threadbare back, "Why, that dude's older than Cheerios." The way they used to say, "Why, that's as old as the hills." Only the hills are much older than Cheerios or any American breakfast cereal, and more noble and enduring are the hills, I surmised, as a bar of sunlight illuminated my orange juice. You can do a lot. You can do a lot at the breakfast table. This is called the Sandhill Cranes of Nebraska. Too bad you weren't here 6 months ago. Too bad you weren't here 6 months ago was the lament I heard on my visit to Nebraska. You could have seen the astonishing spectacle of the Sandhill Cranes, thousands of them, feeding and even dancing on the shores of the Platte River. There was no point in pointing out the impossibility of my being there then because I happened to be somewhere else. So I nodded and put on a look of mild disappointment if only to be part of the commiseration. It was the same look I remember wearing about 6 months ago in Georgia when I was told that I had just missed the spectacular outburst of azaleas, brilliant against the green backdrop of spring. And the same in Vermont 6 months before that, when I arrived shortly after the magnificent foliage had gloriously peaked, Mother Nature, as she is called, having touched the hills with her many-colored brush. A phenomenon that occurs, like the others, around the same time every year when I am apparently off in another state, stuck in a motel lobby with the local paper and a styrofoam cup of coffee, busily missing God knows what. Thank you. So the poet Howard Nemeroff had made up a word for that, what these persons are doing to me there, and it's a transitive verb, and the verb is to azaleate. So, you've been azaleated or you have azaleated, either way, but you came too early, or you missed it. There's no getting around it. This is a poem in which an adult attempts to talk to a teenager, which is risky. But he tries. He's trying. And it's called "To My Favorite 17-Year-Old High School Girl." Do you realize that if you had started building the Parthenon on the day you were born, you would be done in only one more year? Of course, you couldn't have done that all by yourself, so never mind. You're fine just as you are. You are loved simply for being yourself. But did you know that at your age, Julie Garland was pulling down $150,000 a picture? Joan of Arc was leading the French army to victory, and Blaise Pascal had cleaned up his room? No, wait, he's the one who invented the calculator. Of course, there will be time for all that later in your life, after you come out of your room and begin to blossom, or at least pick up all your socks. For some reason, I keep remembering that Lady Jane Grey was Queen of England when she was only 15. But then she was beheaded, so never mind her as a role model. But a few centuries later, when he was your age, Franz Schubert was doing the dishes for his family. But that did not keep him from composing 2 symphonies, 4 operas, and 2 complete masses as a youngster. But of course, that was in Austria at the height of Romantic lyricism, not here in the suburbs of Cleveland. Frankly, who cares if Annie Oakley was a crack shot at 15, or if Maria Callas debuted as Tosca at 17? We think you are special by just being you, playing with your food and staring into space. By the way, I lied about Schubert doing the dishes, but that doesn't mean he never helped out around the house. Cracked myself up there. And in the South, you're supposed to say, well, bless her heart. She didn't talk to me for 2 years, but that was all right. We weren't really talking very much anyway. And this is a poem called "The Trouble with Poetry." Good. Don't worry. It's called an applause. Put your hand together. Another way to put that. I was going to say it's not too long a poem, even though because it's not about all the troubles with poetry. The trouble with poetry. The trouble with poetry, I realized as I walked along a beach one night, cold Florida sand under my bare feet, a show of stars in the sky. The trouble with poetry is that it encourages the writing of more poetry, more guppies crowding the fish tank, more baby rabbits hopping out of their mothers into the dewy grass. And how will it ever end unless the day finally arrives when we have compared everything in the world to everything else in the world? And there is nothing left to do then except quietly close our notebooks and sit with our hands folded on our desks. Poetry fills me with joy, and I rise like a feather in the wind. Poetry fills me with sorrow, and I sink like a chain flung from a bridge. But mostly poetry fills me with the urge to write poetry, to sit in the dark and wait for a little flame to appear at the tip of my pencil. And along with that, the longing to steal, to break into the poems of others with a flashlight and a ski mask. And what an unmerry band of thieves we are, cut purses, common shoplifters, I thought to myself, as a cold wave swirled around my feet, and the lighthouse moved its megaphone over the sea, which is an image I stole directly from Lawrence Ferlinghetti, to be perfectly honest for a moment. The bicycling poet of San Francisco, whose little amusement park of a book I used to carry in a side pocket of my uniform up and down the treacherous halls of high school. So one little point about that is that I think, to just put it bluntly, I mean, writing a poem for me is basically looking for the ending. It's really trying to clear a path to the ending. And so that the poem, in a way, and when you look at it from how it was manufactured or composed, is really just the creation of the only way to possibly get to that ending, right? Sort of putting the ending first, but I write from the beginning to get to the ending. And it's always a surprise. That was a big surprise, sometimes a mild surprise. If it's no surprise, I have to keep writing or throw it in the basket. I had no idea Lawrence Ferlinghetti was going to show up. That image with the lighthouse casting his megaphone over the sea, I wrote that wherever I read that, I wrote it in a margin, or I copied into a book or whatever. It just has sound and light just mixed in this synesthetic way. It's beautiful. And then I thought, well, let's just, I'll just borrow that. And then I said, well, why don't I just cop to it? And then I realized there's Ferlinghetti riding his bicycle to end my poem. And that was and I remember, and it took me back to high school when I first read him in the 50s. I don't know if that's of any interest to anybody but me, but there you have it. I'm trying to restrain the professor in me from leaping out. Here's two poems about dogs. One is about, both of these poems, the dog either speaks or we overhear the dog's thinking. And the first one is 12 lines long, and it's called A Dog on His Master. As young as I look, I am growing older faster than he. 7 to 1 is the ratio they tend to say. Whatever the number, I will pass him one day and take the lead the way I do on our walks in the woods. And if this ever manages to cross his mind, it would be the sweetest shadow I have ever cast on snow or grass. On snow or grass. Thank you so much. And then here's another completely different kind of creature. And here, again, the dog is in charge of the delivery, and it's called the Revenant. And Revenant's a ghost, right? Usually with an agenda, that is to pay you a visit. The Revenant. I am the dog you put to sleep, as you like to call the needle of oblivion. Come back to tell you this simple thing. I never liked you. When I licked your face, I thought of biting off your nose. When I watched you toweling yourself dry, I wanted to leap and unman you with a snap. I resented the way you moved, your lack of animal grace, the way you would sit in a chair to eat, a napkin on your lap, a knife in your hand. I would have run away, but I was too weak. A trick you taught me while I was learning to sit and heel, and greatest of insults, shake hands without a hand. I admit the sight of the leash would excite me, but only because it meant I was about to smell things you had never touched. You do not want to believe this, but I have no reason to lie. I hated the car, hated the rubber toys, disliked your friends, and worse, your relatives. The jingling of my tags drove me mad. You always scratched me in the wrong place. All I ever wanted from you was food and fresh water in my metal bowls. While you slept, I watched you breathe as the moon rose in the sky. It took all of my strength not to raise my head and howl. Now I am free of the collar, free of the yellow raincoat, monogrammed sweater, the absurdity of your lawn. And that is all you need to know about this place, except what you already supposed and are glad it did not happen sooner, that everyone here can read and write, the dogs in poetry, the cats and all the others in prose. Yeah, so that's the way I feel about the dog-cat situation. Wonderful cartoon, not in the New Yorker, by the way, but of a cat and a dog. Well, they're standing up, of course, and it's just a very simple outline. And the cat is saying to the dog, do you know that in ancient Egypt we were held as spiritually significant creatures and could bring good luck and help people with their lives? And the dog says, did you know I was a good boy? This is a sonnet, and it started out when I was observing, well, just over the course of time, observing. I'm new to Gaithersburg, and I don't know how popular this is, but sudden condominium developments and gated communities. And fair enough, people have somewhere to live. But the names of them started to strike me as being odd, because they usually involve an animal, so it's like Deer Hollow or, Turtle Haven or something. And it occurred to me that, well, these are precisely the animals that were driven out of this area. So these buildings could be built there if they ever lived there in the first place. So the poem is called The Golden Years because it's spoken by an older widower. The Golden Years. All I do these drawn-out days is sit in my kitchen at Pheasant Ridge, where there are no pheasant to be seen, and last time I looked, no ridge. I could drive over to Quail Falls and spend the day there playing bridge, but the lack of a falls and the absence of quail would only remind me of Pheasant Ridge. I know a widow at Fox Run and another with a condo at Smoky Ledge. One of them smokes and neither can run. So I'll stick to the pledge I made to Midge. Who frightened the fox and bulldozed the ledge? I ask in my kitchen at Pheasant Ridge. Thank you. I'm just it's all gold up here, but I'm just trying to see where we are, what kind of gold. well, let's see. There's one page I do want to get to. This is like, well, you know, when you're looking for a record to put on anything. Right. And we have, let's see, where are we? Okay, so I'm going to read a couple of poems, and then I'm going to read a few poems from this tattered but new book called Musical Tables, and they're all very short poems, and I'll just give you a sampling of them. So let me read two poems, and then we'll go to that one. So the first one is called On Turning 10, and I started writing it as kind of a parrot to write a satire or whatever on the almost subgenre of poems that poets write on their birthdays when they end in a zero. So you find it's a professional obligation to mark this, or to encase this landmark in verse. And I thought I'd go back to the beginning of all this horrible sadness and self-lamentation. And started. And then as the poem went on, I kind of the satire, the fun of the satire drained out of it, and to use an image in here, and I took it more seriously. Well, you be the judge. It's called On Turning 10. The whole idea of it makes me feel like I'm coming down with something worse than any stomach ache or the headaches I get from reading in bad light. A kind of measles of the spirit or mumps of the psyche, a disfiguring chickenpox of the soul. You tell me it is too early to be looking back, but that is because you have forgotten the perfect simplicity of being one and the beautiful complexity introduced by two. But I can lie on my bed and remember every digit. At 4, I was an Arabian wizard. I could make myself invisible by drinking a glass of milk a certain way. At 7, I was a soldier. At 9, a prince. But now I am mostly at the window watching the late afternoon light. Back then, it never fell so solemnly against the side of my treehouse, and my bicycle never leaned against the garage as it does today, all the dark blue speed drained out of it. This is the beginning of sadness, I say to myself as I walk through the universe in my sneakers. It is time to say goodbye to my imaginary friends, time to turn the first big number. It seems only yesterday I used to believe there was nothing under my skin but light. If you cut me, I would shine. But now, when I fall upon the sidewalks of life, I skin my knees, I bleed. And I've talked to kids since then that are close to 10, closer than I, and it's a big deal. It's a big deal. And I think it's one of the first times that children seriously encounter ambivalence, because they want to get older, you know, like their big brother or whatever. They eventually drive and smoke or whatever the goals of life happen to be at that time. But they know they're leaving something, too, behind. And I think they're very conflicted emotionally about those two poles. Let's see. Okay, yeah, I think I'll read this poem, and then I will read a couple of short ones. And this is called, it's about that time in 40s, 1950s, up into the early 60s, up until the John Kennedy, actually, where men wore fedora hats, at least in cities. And I thought I'd just do something with that. And it's called The Death of the Hat. Once every man wore a hat. In the ashen newsreels, avenues of cities were broad rivers flowing with hats. Ballparks swelled with thousands of straw hats, brims and bands brims and bands, rows of men smoking and cheering in shirt sleeves. Hats were the law. They went without saying. You noticed a man in a crowd without a hat. You bought them from Adams or Dobbs, who branded your initials in gold on the inside band. Trolleys crisscrossed the city. Steamships sailed in and out of the harbor. Men with hats gathered on the docks. There was a person to block your hat and a hat-checked girl to mind it while you had a drink or ate a steak with peas and a baked potato. In your office stood a hat rack. The day war was declared, everyone in the street was wearing a hat, and they were wearing hats when a ship loaded with men and women sank in the icy sea. My father wore one to work every day and returned home carrying the evening paper, the winter chill radiating from his overcoat. But today we go bareheaded into the winter streets, stand hatless on frozen platforms. Today the mailbox on the roadside and the spruce trees behind the house wear cold white hats of snow. Mice scurry from the stone walls at night in their thin fur hats to eat the birdseed that has spilled. And now my father, after a life of work, wears a hat of earth, and on top of that, a lighter one of cloud and sky, a hat of wind. Thank you. Thank you. So the musical tables, the title is obviously a takeoff on musical chairs, but because there's nowhere to sit down and there's really no music, and the tables are just in the way, it's an impossible game to play, and it just reeks of pointlessness, as some of these poems do. So I'm just going to read a handful of them and go from one, jump from one to the other. And the first one is called, here it is. The first one is called 3 a.m. Only my hand is asleep, but it's a start. Well, what? No. It'll take a long time. Here we are. Carbon dating. He tried it once as a last resort, but most of the women were 1 million years old. And this is called, let's see, it's called, I'm staying in a very nice hotel now, but this is called Bad Hotel. I told the woman from housekeeping, who was eager to do my room, to just come in and pretend I'm not here, which is exactly what I had been doing ever since I checked in. And you won't believe it that this poem is called, the title is Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. Trouble was not his middle name. And some of them are painful. There's one called Divorce. Divorce, no more heavy ball, just the sound of the dragged chain with every other step. Yeah, that's a good muted sound. Sound of muted pain there. I've got a good ear for these things. And there's some rough ones in here. There's one called Breaking Up. Like the nomadic dollar, I passed to the cash register. Sorry, I'm not even going to finish that one. Flaubert. Flaubert was always looking for the perfect word, right? Flaubert. As he looked for the right word, several wrong words appeared in his window. And here's another. This is the rough one I was trying to get to. And this is the title is very important here. Of course, it's one of 5 lines, so. Refrigerator light. The minute she slams the door, I stop thinking about her. Two more. Motel parking lot. Saying goodbye is so sad. I don't even bother to turn around to see what it was you just threw at me. And then, I don't know if we have time for Q&A now. I don't know. Well, let me finish anyway. So this is the last poem, and I want to thank you for being such a great audience, and great to be here indeed. Yeah, for you. And the title is Children. There's a new movie out titled Children. I don't know what it's about, but I like the voice on the radio when it says, children now playing everywhere. Thank you. Thank you very much. Do you want to have 5 minutes of question Q&A, just a little bit? If you're not double parked or anything? Or I don't know how any of that would cause any curiosity about anything, frankly, but.
Just raise your hand and we'll bring the microphone to you if you want to ask a question.
Now no one's going to have a question. Well, we could, good night. Yeah, well, this is fine. Why, do you have a question? Okay, go ahead. I can.
Yeah, how much rewriting do you do?
How what?
How much rewriting do you do? Or editing, I guess you would say.
Well, now, how much was I writing when I?
No. Rewriting, right?
Like, how rewriting?
You're one of those people who makes it look real easy.
Yeah, not as much as you'd think.
Okay.
It's because I write almost all of the poems in one sitting. And that can take, if you're lucky on these short ones, it'd take like under a minute. But it could take 3 or 4 hours. Going back to Ferlinghetti, the curiosity that's driving me is not what the poem means or what the theme of the poem is. Those are classroom questions. It has nothing to do with the act of composition. The thing I'm really thinking about, and I think about it more and more as the poem is going on, is how am I going to stop? How am I going to get out of this? How can I find an ending, a place where I don't want to say anymore and you don't want to hear anymore, where we have an agreement. And it's an interesting place. So my kind of pet analogy is moving the poem from Kansas to Oz. So you start with something very simple, and I'm sitting here looking at this tree or something like that. And then the poem progresses, and maybe by point navigation, it takes a left turn here and then finds another little alleyway to go down. Then what do you know, there's Lawrence Ferlinghetti, and that's the ending. Now, that construction of the poem from beginning to end, beginning, middle, and end, Truffaut said every film has a beginning, middle, and an end, but not necessarily in that order. So, but once I get to the end, that's cooked. So when I go back and revise, or I might do it right then and there by rewriting the poem and making little changes, I'm not really revisioning anything because it's done. The run of the poem, the rhetorical run of the poem is over. What I do later is fine-tuning, and I make adjustments, as Paul Desmond said, with tinier and tinier screwdrivers for sound and rhythm. So I might find a better word that echoes some words around it, or I might just make the rhythm a little more rhythmical. So it's not. So the body of the work and the transit through the work is done in one sitting, or it's not. And we have the waste paper basket there, the writer's best friend, or if you have a little basketball net to make it a little more using. Yes, you're the only child. You should have gone first. This guy. Yes.
I'm curious, do you prefer writing or teaching?
writing or teaching, where they're so different. I mean, as an only child, I like being alone, so. But, I mean, you can see now, I could talk about poetry for another half an hour, but they go hand in hand. I've stopped teaching, and I'm still writing, so I guess I like writing better. I don't teach anymore. But I like talking to students. And when I go to colleges or prep schools or whatever, there's usually a class, and I talk to some students. I love doing that with students. I just don't want to see them again. You know, I just don't want to see your face again. Good luck with your poetry. Because I like talking about poetry. I don't want to read their poems. I don't want to have meetings. I don't want to have conferences. I don't want to be late for class and all that stuff. But the pure center of teaching, talking to students, I still really enjoy. So, now you had a question.
How old were you when you wrote your first poem, and what inspired you?
Oh, okay. I thought you said, how old are you? You are an only child. I started writing poems in high school, where everybody gets through you can't get through high school or college without writing something that we just have to call a poem by default. I mean, it's something about how sad you are or whatever it is. Yeah, and I got my first book published when I was over 40. What was I doing in between? None of your business. I was wasting a lot of time. And I was reading a lot of other poets, and I was trying to copy them and imitate them. And the results were travesties of these other poets. And it took me until I was in my 30s that I found my voice, as they say. And that really means combining your many influences after you've read deeply and long in a way that the sources cannot be easily detected. So you're actually sounding, that's what originality is. It's combining sources that are covertly joined. And then you have an experience that Seamus Heaney talks about when he wrote his famous poem, Digging, his breakthrough signature poem, taught in all the classrooms. And he said when he read that poem back to himself, a young poet now, he said, not boasting about it because he's Irish, he said, he realized for the first time that no one else could have written that poem but him. And that's what I started feeling when I was in my 30s. I was writing a few poems that I thought, well, yeah, I haven't heard that exactly, that tone or whatever it was. And then it's like, we were saying earlier, like Dickens creates all these hundreds of characters. If you're a poet, you just have to create one character, and you're done for life. And that character is the sound of your voice that doesn't sound quite like anyone else's voice, which is analogous to playing the saxophone, like 100,000 or 300,000 people play the saxophone, but you, Sonny Rollins or Coleman Hawkins, can play it, and it sounds like you. How does that happen? I don't know, but that's that. Yes, right there. Oh, the microphone, right.
What's your favorite part of being a writer?
My favorite what?
Part of being a writer, like writing it.
Oh, part of being a writer. Well, being alone and writing, I mean, it's amazingly, it's very entertaining. It's self-entertaining. It's extremely fun. And not in a sort of a merry-go-round way, but you're focused on something and you're creating something kind of out of nothing, and you're trying to make it as good as possible. Good lines, good stanzas, little witticism here, good metaphor there. And as you're constructing it, it makes you feel more alone, which is good for me. Maybe it's really an intensification of being alone. Now that's a great pleasure, and to come out of it, it's like coming out of a dream almost. So that's the best part. And then, getting famous.